Hello, and thanks for joining us for today's webinar titled The Outlook for Cloud-Based Backup and Recovery. Can you afford not to include cloud in your continuity plan? I'm Kevin Collins from UnitTrans, and I'm here with Earl Follis, Senior Analyst at SSG Now, and Dave LeClaire, VP of Product Marketing at UnitTrans, and they'll be taking us through today's presentation. And don't forget, one lucky attendee will be walking away with a $100 Amazon gift card. We'll contact the winner via email after the webinar. But before we get started, I'd like to cover a few housekeeping items. This session will be recorded, and you'll receive an email after the event with a link to the on-demand version of the webinar. I would also encourage you to ask questions along the way. In the Q&A button, the Q&A box in the bottom right-hand corner, you can do so by typing them into the player itself. We'll answer your questions at the end of this session. At this point, I'll turn it over to Earl. Enjoy the presentation, and Earl, take it away.
Well, greetings, everyone, from beautiful Austin, Texas. Thanks, Kevin. My name is Earl Follis, analyst with SSG Now, and I'll be your webinar host today. And also joining us as a subject matter expert is Dave LeClaire, VP of Product Marketing for UnitTrans. And we're going to kind of try to keep this webinar as light and conversational as we can. So I'm going to ask Dave to pitch in some on the front portion of the webinar, which will be mostly educational information about cloud-based backup and recovery. And then coming a little bit later, Dave will talk specifically about UnitTrans solutions in this particular category. So first, let's talk about what backup and recovery is and is not. And strictly speaking, cloud-based backup recovery isn't disaster recovery and also is not business continuity. Traditionally, disaster recovery has been considered restoring the infrastructure, getting your file servers back up and running, all your computing resources, et cetera, after some type of disaster event. And then business continuity is taking that disaster recovery one step further, where rather than simply restoring your infrastructure, you're actually beginning to think about how to get your business back up and running after a disaster. And that could include things such as your telephone system, so you can take calls from your customers and you can make calls. How do you continue to let your employees work during a disaster recovery process? And that could be work from home or other ways of having your workers be able to still access your computing resources. And then business continuity specifically takes into account how do we restore business operations, things like writing checks, payroll, accounts payable, accounts receivable, and probably most importantly of those things is your customer service processes. As I said, being able to take calls, being able to respond to emails in a timely fashion. So backup and recovery is really part of that process that is simply devoted to backing up files on a regular basis and then being able to recover those files easily and quickly when required. And I'll just mention real quickly some of the challenges with disaster recovery. And that is, disaster recovery is actually a pretty hard thing to do in the traditional sense, what we've always done, what we've always thought of as disaster recovery. So part of the challenge is you really have to be trained in disaster recovery to be able to perform that position, that job in the traditional sense. And then we're going to talk a little bit about how DR involving the cloud is going to make that a whole lot easier. Some of the other challenges, things like developing and managing a disaster recovery plan, because it's very important to have a written plan in place for when a disaster strikes. You'll know exactly what's going to happen and when to restore your infrastructure. Another thing that's obviously true for those of you that have ever worked with traditional DR vendors and DR processes is that off-premises DR site is a very expensive proposition. And I'll give you a perfect example. At a previous employer, I supported disaster recovery for several state agencies here in Texas. And the biggest of those agencies was spending $1 million a year on their disaster recovery planning and capabilities. And we struggled to try to do 2 DR tests a year to make sure that that process would work. And that's one of the reasons a lot of companies haven't been able to invest in a DR plan and a DR strategy, is because it has traditionally been so expensive to do that. And then also, just like sometimes if you're a little short in your budget, your insurance may be one of the things you decide to cut from your budget. And your DR plan can be part of that from an IT perspective. If you're running low on budget, one of the things you may cut is your DR plan. So what DR with cloud-based resources gives you is very low-cost disaster recovery, and we'll talk about that more as we go forward. So let's just talk about some of the options for backup and recovery. That could be totally on-premises, so the traditional data protection plan in the old days was take and disk-based local on-premises protection, and then as we began to get into virtualized platforms for servers, we started looking at snapshots and replication processes to get those things back up and running in a timely manner. And then just in the last few years, the hybrid data protection scheme has come to prominence, and that's where you may combine an on-premises appliance in your data center combined with off-site data protection, and obviously that could be a second data center, a colo. It could also be combining that on-premise appliance within the cloud storage, and then there's simply pure cloud-based data protection that we'll talk about too. Dave, do you have any comments to make simply about kind of the landscape of the different options that are available?
Yeah, I think we have seen a pretty rapid evolution over the past couple of years from that traditional, very manual-based backup and disaster recovery, as you said, moving stuff manually off-site, testing things being very expensive. We've seen in the past couple of years kind of a move more towards all-in-one appliances, move towards more integrated cloud into backup, as well as some very rapid advancements in automation. You can now automate the testing of your DR environment so that it can run kind of manual test and validate that your environment is operating properly, as often as you want. You can actually run it daily if you want. So there's really been a lot of progress, particularly as we've kind of embraced cloud technologies, as cloud has done for so many industries, but it's really had a profound impact on backup and DR going into the future.
So if you think about what Dave just said, I mentioned a company, an agency spending $1 million a year, and we were getting 2 DR tests a year if we were lucky, and we had to plan for months. And with modern technology, you'll be able to do a DR test on demand anytime you want to. It's simply an incredible move forward in the technology for backup recovery and DR processes. So let's talk about some of the differences. On-prem data protection is the fastest because everything remains in the local data center, but it also has the highest cost and requires ongoing maintenance management. You'll have to watch the capacity of your local hardware, your storage, to make sure that you have enough storage for your data protection. And it becomes maybe not a full-time job, but it is quite a burden, especially in a larger organization, to manage the on-premises data protection capabilities. If we look at off-premises, I can tell you right off the bat, this is one of the most compelling parts of cloud-based data protection, backup and restore, and that is the low cost of these backups. With capabilities such as Amazon's Glacier, which is a long-term, very low-cost storage mechanism, and other cloud-based mechanisms, you can really bring the cost of your backups down considerably. And one of the downsides to that cloud-based data protection scheme is it is going to be a little bit slower to recover mission-critical files than if you had all of your data stored on-site, on-premises. And I think as we go through the rest of this webinar, you'll see that for a lot of customers, a hybrid architecture may be the best option, where you may keep some of your data locally, and then you can tier that data to long-term storage in the cloud as you wish. So hybrid data protection, as I mentioned, is probably the best balance between the speed of your backups, the speed of the operations versus the cost of those operations. And including in that cost, you need to analyze the cost of managing, as I mentioned, on-premises data versus simply being able to set up an appliance that will handle the storage of that data into the cloud. So hybrid also gives you the speed of local backups with the automation and the low cost of cloud backups and archiving. Now, one of the things Dave mentioned was off-site storage, and for those of you that have been around IT for long enough, I can remember many years ago working for small companies who couldn't afford a DR strategy and really couldn't afford off-site storage, so A lot of times we took our backup tapes home in our briefcase so that we would have a copy off-site in case a disaster hit the company premises itself. And this hybrid data protection we're talking about using an appliance, we'll talk in more detail later about how you can achieve that hybrid data protection. And that appliance could be a physical or a virtual appliance that would give you those capabilities. Dave, you want to expand on hybrid data just a little bit, hybrid data protection?
Yeah, we're big proponents of a hybrid approach here at UnitTrends. If you look at kind of our primary product, we sell an appliance that generally goes into your on-premises location to do local backup. But with the enhancements of cloud and being able to go to a hybrid cloud environment, you can now actually not have to invest so much in storage to keep a lot of data for retention purposes on site. You can keep a minimum amount on site so that you can restore quickly from small incidents. You have a server go down, you get hit with a ransomware attack. You want to be able to restore that server within minutes with minimum downtime and minimum data loss. You don't want to have to go out to the cloud to pull something down every single time you have a disaster. But on the other hand, if you have long-term data retention needs, if you need to, for compliance reasons, keep copies of your backups and data for 5, 7, in some cases 15 plus years in some industries, cloud is a very cost-effective way of doing it. But you're essentially trading off what your recovery point and recovery time objectives are versus cost. The resulting technology that we now have, we can kind of get the best of both worlds with hybrid. You can get that very rapid response that for events that occur locally and still be protected from larger disasters, as well as get lower costs for long-term retention. So it's kind of a win-win-win by going to that hybrid cloud approach.
Great, a win-win-win. So let's talk about, in general, some of the benefits of cloud-based data protection. One of the big things is it's easy to automate. You don't have to worry about it once you get your appliance configured the way you want it. This is a process that tends to be pretty bulletproof, and it allows you to concentrate on more important things than the data protection side. And I think for a lot of large companies, for sure, one of the reasons they've been kind of slow to get into data protection of end users is that they didn't want to have to assign personnel to support the restoration process at the end user level, and that would typically be somebody like your help desk. But one of the great things about cloud-based data protection and backup and recovery is that in most cases, it's going to allow your end users to use the self-service capabilities to restore files that have been deleted, whether accidentally or on purpose. And that is a daily occurrence in most companies. So that is not something that we as IT want to get involved in if we don't have to. And so the whole process of cloud-based data protection supports the capabilities for end users to perform self-service. And then, as I mentioned, the importance of off-site storage, by definition, storing your data in cloud and archiving into the cloud automatically gives you that off-site storage of backups for DR purposes. So if you have a physical event or a physical issue hit your main data center, you've already got those backups residing off-site. And that's also another process that you no longer have to manage. That is automatic. So you can get rid of your briefcase now because the cloud-based data protection will handle the off-site storage for you. And one of the things that is interesting to note is kind of a step above standard infrastructure DR is that now you can actually have a recovery scheme or strategy that can include getting the applications themselves, certain applications themselves, back up and running at the state they were. You can pick that recovery point objective, but you can restore those to a specific state. So for instance, if you have, let's say you have an Exchange server or Exchange farm, and that's a critical application as it would be for most, you can actually build that into your disaster recovery scheme where it would not just restore the servers, but it would actually restore all the files that are needed, the configuration and everything to get those critical applications up and running. So more of the features of cloud-based data protection. We've talked about low cost versus traditional data protection and disaster recovery. There are many different ways you can deploy this type of protection depending on the vendor you choose and the type of appliance you choose. I've already mentioned the self-service aspects of being able to restore and recover files from your cloud-based storage. Most of these cloud-based data protection schemes and strategies are hypervisor agnostic, so most of them support the major hypervisor platforms. And all are also operating system agnostic. They don't care what the underlying OS is. And then obviously, just like traditional data protection, we can think now about protecting client data and obviously protecting server data. And one of the most important things to remember in the disaster recovery process and in the backup and recovery process, it's not simply the failover to your DR, but also the failback. In the old days, we used to say that backing up your data was only as good as your ability to restore that data. A lot of people back when we had tape drives did their backups every night, weekly, etc., but never went out and tested the restore mechanisms to make sure that the tapes were working as designed. And I've been part of recovery efforts before where we had everything backed up, but for whatever reason, a technical reason, a problem with a piece of hardware, we had trouble doing the restore. So the failover is important, and also the failback is important. So some more of the features. A lot of you may be involved in different types of companies that are required to encrypt data. So you could be a financial company, or for any reason you need to protect the data due to regulatory or compliance requirements. And then also we all see the data breaches that occur. You know, we just had a release of a data breach at Yahoo that happened a couple of years ago that was only identified. So the encryption of data is key to protecting the data that you store in the cloud. I mentioned a little bit about specialized application support. So for certain types of mission critical applications, you can actually have a recovery plan that includes the restoration of the application and not just the underlying servers. We also have the ability to save money in the cloud by compressing the data and deduping the data via the appliance before we ship that data up to the cloud for storage. You have the ability to throttle the bandwidth used by that connection to the cloud. And as I mentioned before, in most cases, this technology is reliable and for the most part will manage itself once you get everything configured correctly. And probably another one of the most important things to think about now that we're talking about cloud-based data protection, that off-prem data protection, is you no longer have to worry about scaling the resources for your on-premises storage so that you have enough both for your production and for your disaster recovery or for your backup and recovery process. Dave, you have any just general comments about cloud-based data protection based on what I've talked about so far?
Yeah, one of the things that we tend to caution people about before they kind of jump into cloud-based data protection is how do you actually get your initial data set kind of up into the cloud? Because a lot of backup solutions are very efficient doing kind of incremental forever updates, but getting that initial snapshot, particularly if you're a mid-size or larger enterprise, you may have 50, 100, couple hundred terabytes of data. If you got to send that all over a WAN connection to the cloud, that can take days or weeks to actually get that initial data set up and running. So one of the things we advise people to do is look for solutions that actually offer a seeding option that allows you to actually use physical media to actually overnight ship your initial data set to your cloud backup provider. Get that initial data set seeded. You know, it will only take a day if you're actually using an overnight shipping to get as much data as you have, including many terabytes. And from that point on, you're only basically backing up incremental changes, which are much smaller. It's going to take up much less bandwidth and can be done within your backup window. So that's another feature we tend to recommend people look for that frequently they overlook until they start and they realize, wow, this is going to take me 6 weeks to get all my data into the cloud.
Yeah, that's a great point. And if you have a large server infrastructure, it could take way too long to get all those different assets protected. So good point. So archiving in the cloud, I talked a little bit about things like AWS Glacier, ultra low cost archiving in public clouds. I've also talked about the maintenance-free aspect of these backup operations. Once you configure the appliance, it's going to pretty much sit there and do its job without a lot of manual intervention day to day. And some of the benefits here, when you look at the analysis of the amount of money you can save by using data protection in the cloud, it gives you two opportunities. One is if you already have a data protection or a DR strategy in place, by leveraging the ability for archiving or cloud-based data protection, it's going to lower the cost of whatever you're doing today. And Dave is going to talk more about this, specifically about the UnitTrans aspects of that. But one aspect is it'll allow you to do the same type of disaster recovery and data protection activities you're doing today at a much lower cost. Or this allows smaller companies or companies that have never had the required skill set in-house to be able to implement data protection and disaster recovery where perhaps before those plans were never even in place due to the cost, due to the inability to support your efforts with skilled personnel. And this is a reliable way to do things. These appliances will let you know if they ever have a problem. Obviously, they can let you know if a backup ever fails. As Dave has mentioned already, you have the ability to go in and do a DR test by pushing a button. And then we also mentioned the fact that by default you now have all your backup data off-prem, so you don't have to worry about transporting that data to an off-site storage spot. So this completes the educational portion of our program. And now Dave is going to take over the slide deck, and he's going to talk more about UnitTrans cloud-based backup and restore solutions.
Great, Errol. Thanks. I think we're just going to do a quick change over here so I can share my screen. And then I will dive into specifically the UnitTrans solution for backup. And we do focus on delivering an all-in-one solution that includes a hybrid cloud backup and continuity offer. So Earl said early on in his presentation that no one really wants to be focusing on backup and continuity anymore. We all have more important things to do to drive our business forward. So that's one of the things that we think of as our mission, that we want to deliver to IT professionals the confidence that they can keep their business up and running, that they can protect their data, and not have to focus on downtime and worrying about backup. And we do this by trying to build solutions that are simpler, faster, and more flexible than what we've had as an industry really for generations. And the cloud-empowered technologies that are now available really have enabled us to do things as far as flexibility, as far as agility, to really transform the way backup and continuity works, to basically make that technology available to companies of all sizes. 10 years ago, DR was really the domain of the large enterprise. Now, with DR as a service and cloud technologies, it really can be made available to even SMB customers on a cost-effective basis. The way we do this is we focus on creating best-in-class all-in-one appliances. They can be physical appliances. We have our recovery series appliances that include the hardware, software, storage, everything you need to basically for your backup solution all in one. And we also have virtual appliances as well that installs a virtual machine onto hardware that you may already have inside your environment. And we're trying to basically provide something that provides the most flexibility in a single solution. So with that all-in-one appliance, you get simple, intuitive, local backup for both archiving as well as for backup and recovery. All of our appliances are cloud-empowered for DR and archiving and long-term data retention. We support a huge array of operating systems and hypervisors and applications, over 250 different versions of OS hypervisors and applications within a single platform for both virtual and physical systems. And we include some pretty advanced features that can make sure to keep you up and running, including instant recovery of your Windows and virtual machines locally, as well as being able to have a full disaster recovery as a service in the cloud with what we call recovery assurance. And recovery assurance is that automated DR and backup tests that we were talking about earlier, where Earl was saying, previously they were running a couple of DR tests a year. That's actually pretty good. We've done actually a survey generally of over 1,000 IT folks. We found that over half are actually testing either once a year or never. But recovery assurance allows you to automate that testing and validate that your environment's going to work when you need it to work. So you don't find out at 2 a.m. on a Saturday night when a hurricane's hitting that your backups for the past 6 months aren't going to restore quite the way you thought they were, or your API that you depend upon in your DR environment has drifted out of compliance. We can automate all that testing and make sure that you have complete confidence that you're going to be able to recover. So we also look at this, as I said earlier, a hybrid cloud solution does an awful lot to have the best of both worlds. You can get an on-premise appliance that's there to give you data protection, recovery, and even some local disaster recovery for your full virtual and physical infrastructure. And you get really advanced features there that can help minimize the amount of storage that you actually need to have on-premise. Advanced adaptive inline deduplication, inline deduplication ratios that can compress your data through a variety of techniques by a 20-to-1 ratio. We also include a built-in real-time replication engine so that you can move copies of your backups to wherever you need to have them be located, whether it's to a second location that you control, a mega cloud like Amazon or Microsoft, as well as a purpose-built cloud that we actually created as well. Once you actually have your data in the cloud, you can also use that data, as Earl said, to spin up a disaster recovery environment. And we actually have a couple different options for that, including a DRaaS offer in our own cloud, as well as a couple different ways of doing it in those mega scale clouds as well. So I wanted to talk a little bit about the flexibility that we actually provide in our solution, because what we found in talking with customers is that one size doesn't fit all for cloud. Different companies have different approaches about the strategic vendors that they're partnering with for cloud, and in many cases they may be partnering with multiple cloud companies, particularly when you start looking at complex environments where you're protecting user data. Maybe you're using something as simple as backing up to Microsoft OneDrive for user data, and using Azure or something else for your server data. There's a lot of different ways that you can do backup and continuity with the cloud. So I'm going to walk through kind of 3 primary choices for Continuity Cloud, and we do support all of them. The first is to use a vendor-based Continuity Cloud, such as the purpose-built cloud UnitTrans has built. This is something we've created and manage and operate ourselves. It's designed specifically for data protection and disaster recovery. The second is to basically work with a service provider, either a managed service provider, a CSP, an SSP, who's perhaps building a cloud of their own that you can replicate data into, and we support that model as well. And the third model is to use a hyperscale cloud, such as AWS or Google or Azure, and replicate your data for both long-term retention or disaster recovery, or maybe even cloud bursting if you actually just need additional capacity to use one of those hyperscale clouds. And we support a wide variety of clouds in that case as well. So our platform really is designed to work with however you need it to work. That's both for on-premise. We're going to be able to work with your virtual and physical infrastructure, even your legacy operating systems. We support all of that. And we take the same approach when it comes to cloud. We don't want to dictate to you what's the right cloud solution that you should be deploying. We want to basically give you flexibility and the options of deploying and getting backup and cloud continuity wherever you need it with whatever vendor you want, whether it's doing it all with UnitTrans or whether you want to do it with another one of our partners. This next chart actually shows you a little bit more detail on what that unmatched flexibility really looks like, where we can really deliver continuity everywhere you need it. When you look at your on-premise location, we would put a physical appliance, a recovery series appliance that ranges in size from 1 terabyte to 200 terabytes of storage locally, and you can stack most of those up on top of each other, so you can get it into really large environments. Or if you're interested in using hardware that you already own, storage that you already own, you can actually deploy a virtual appliance to Citrix Zen Server, VMware, or Hyper-V using our UnitTrans Enterprise Backup software solution. We also, if you don't even want to have a physical appliance at all in your environment, we actually have another solution called Boomerang that actually does the replication direct actually into the cloud. So, and once we look at the cloud, we can both set up replication targets for your data in the UnitTrans cloud or into a hyperscale cloud, or we can simply use the hyperscale cloud as an archive target. The difference being is whether we actually put a piece of software, our UnitTrans Enterprise Backup, in the hyperscale cloud, or whether you're simply using the hyperscale cloud as a storage target. And we have the flexibility to do both of those scenarios. We currently have support for hyperscale clouds for archiving direct into Amazon S3, Google's cloud, including their low-cost long-term storage, rack space, as well as the ability to actually put UEB as a replication target into Microsoft Azure that's actually launching right now, and Amazon Web Services coming soon as well. Or if you're interested in doing this all in a private cloud, you can actually do this on your own to a second location that you control. Looking just a little bit deeper into the UnitTrans cloud to give you an idea of exactly what this is a purpose-built cloud that gives you cloud-based storage and disaster recovery services. We have the UnitTrans cloud located in data centers across 5 different countries around the globe. And it's priced a little bit different than a lot of other cloud solutions that are priced out there. In many cases, cloud solutions tend to bill you for how much cloud storage you're consuming. Our UnitTrans cloud, we call Forever Cloud, actually is priced different. We price it based on the amount of data you're protecting locally, which basically means you get long-term retention for free with the UnitTrans cloud. So if you protect 2 terabytes of data locally in your on-premises location, we only charge you for 2 terabytes of Forever Cloud. Multiple copies of your data are going to be stored as we basically do weekly, daily, weekly, monthly, and annual backups using a GFS policy. Your cloud consumption will grow and grow and grow over time, but we never charge you for that additional data. We only charge you for the amount that is being protected. We also have a number of things we can do in the UnitTrans cloud. We have a white glove services team that's there to help you basically get into the cloud if you need help basically recovering your data or testing your DR environment. That team is available to help you with. And we also include the ability to seed your data into our cloud as well. So it's a very feature-rich cloud. And it's designed as an all-in-one feature into all of our appliances. So this is something that's very easy to add on and turn on in our physical and virtual appliances. The other option is to actually use one of the hyperscale clouds. And in this particular case, we would actually set up a UnitTrans Enterprise Backup in, for example, Microsoft Azure, using the Azure Marketplace, and use that as a target for replicating backup copies into that Azure cloud. This actually works very simply. It gets deployed straight from the Azure Marketplace. And once you actually have both a recovery series or UEB locally in your data center, as well as a version in Microsoft Azure, we can actually manage them through one single pane of glass. So one interface actually is able to control both environments, and you're able to actually move your workloads and restore your data back seamlessly using the same interface that you've become familiar with from our local backup. And then the last thing I wanted to touch on before we open this up to some Q&A is typically when we talk about cloud backup, we're usually talking about systems that are local in your environment, servers, user systems. But more and more of the world is actually moving towards SaaS-based environments, particularly for things like email and collaboration. And we've recently introduced a new product called UnitTransCloud Backup for Office 365 that allows you to actually back up your Office 365 mail, your Office 365 SharePoint, as well as anything that's being stored in OneDrive for business. And this is a service that is very easy to set up, does automatic backups multiple times a day, backs your data up to the Microsoft Azure cloud, so that you can very easily restore emails or files that have been deleted from the Office 365 environment. And the reason why this is necessary is Office 365 really is pretty limited in its ability to do recovery. It really only has some features that are designed for things like legal hold. It's really not very useful if you have a user who deleted an email and suddenly needs to get it back and it's no longer in their recycle bin. So this is a backup solution that makes sure that you can protect not only your local data as well as your cloud data that might be running in Azure or AWS, but also able to protect your SaaS-based email environment as well. So with that, I think we're going to bring Kevin back into this, and we'll take some questions for Earl and myself.
Thanks, Dave. Great presentation, guys. And as a reminder, if you'd like to ask a question, please do so by typing it into the bottom right-hand side of the player. We'll start off with some of the questions that came in during the presentation. First question is from John. How secure is cloud-based backup and recovery? Is encryption used? If so, at what point in the process is data encrypted?
Dave, that's probably a better question for you than for me since we've already drilled into UnitTrans. You want to talk about the encryption capabilities?
Sure. Yeah, we encrypt data both at rest and in flight. So, and we use very rich AES 256-bit encryption. So your data is encrypted pretty much everywhere that it's going to be. So it's very secure. In general, you know, there's been I'll comment kind of on cloud security in general. I know it's one of the most frequently cited concerns about cloud in most surveys. We've seen a little bit of a dip of that in the past 12 months, but for years it's always been the #1 concern. And I think in general, most cloud environments, particularly those that are getting the necessary certifications, are probably more secure than most data centers in most companies. The thing you probably want to look for is that there's something called SSA 16 SOC 2 compliance, and that's basically what a cloud data center is going to do to basically validate that they're doing all the modern and necessary things to be secure, both with your data as well as their physical environment. The fact that they've got 24-hour, security and electronic monitoring and biometrics and all that stuff will show up in that sort of report. So that's another thing to look for if you actually do have any concerns around security with a particular cloud vendor.
Excellent. Thank you. The next question is from James. What is a bare metal restore, and is it considered part of a cloud-based backup and recovery solution?
So bare metal restore is whenever you actually have an image of a server operating system that you could ship out in the case that your vendor could ship out in the case of a disaster that would allow you to very quickly restore the entire operating system for that server. Dave, you want to talk about how UnitTrans handles bare metal restores?
Yeah, we do bare metal restores for just about every operating system I think I can think of. we do not only bare metal restores to similar hardware, but we also do what's called dissimilar bare metal. So you don't even have to restore to the exact same piece of hardware. So if you failed over on an HP environment and want to move over to a Lenovo environment, you can make that shift. The other thing that we support, and I touched on it briefly, it's probably worth another word or two about that's similar, is our instant recovery capabilities. And instant recovery basically allows you to use your backups that are actually on your backup appliance as a production environment to actually do a recovery while you fix your production environment. So, for example, if you had a host that failed and had multiple VMs on it, because we actually have backups located on our appliance, we can actually boot into a new host environment, a new hypervisor, using that backup as a means to get up and running. We'll actually run in a production environment. We'll keep track of any changes that are taking place. And then when it's time to actually, you fixed your production environment, you want to move back to it, we can live migrate back. Because of this, instant recovery is the type of feature that allows you to really minimize your downtime to just a couple minutes in the event that you lose a VM or an entire host. We also do that actually for Windows systems as well. So a little bit different than bare metal, but kind of similar in the same vein concept.
All right. We have a couple of questions around kind of time to recover. So the question from Kim is, what are the recovery times if I need data retrieved quickly? And another question is, how long does it take to restore files in a pure cloud backup environment?
So I'm assuming, Dave, you probably have some hard numbers, or you probably have much more experience with this than I do, but I would assume that the speed of those, that recovery process or restoration process is based on bandwidth of that connection, correct?
Yeah, your mileage is definitely going to vary based on the network connection that you have. There's two things to worry about when it comes to bandwidth. You want to worry about, do I have enough bandwidth to actually do my backups fast enough? And that's going to be dependent on a number of things, including what my daily change rate is in my environment, how fast the network connection that I actually have, and a number of other things. We do provide some general guidelines for how much you actually need, but this is also one of the reasons why having a seeding service actually really helps to basically get your initial installation back up and running. If you actually need to pull your data back, you actually kind of have the same challenge. If it's a small amount of data, it will come back fairly quickly. But if it's a large amount of data, if you actually have lost your entire data center because you actually had something horrible happen in your location, there are a few different ways to basically get back up and running. One is, at that point, this is really why having a DR environment and DRAS can really help you. We actually provide a 1-hour SLA for your entire environment to basically get you back up and running if you actually have our DRAS offer. And that's for as large of an environment that you actually might have. If you're talking about getting your data back and getting your production environment back up and running, we actually have data shipments SLAs. So if we can actually send your data back over the WAN, because it's small enough, we will do that. But if it's a large amount of data, similar to like seeding, getting it up there, we may actually put it on physical disk and overnight it to you. We may even actually rebuild you an exact replica of what your physical appliance looked like before you had the disaster that took it down, and send you a brand new appliance with all your data and backups located on it to get you back up and running as fast as possible. So there's really a number of things that you can do there. And this is why having a well-thought-out DR plan with all the different contingencies of what systems actually have, how much downtime and data loss can I withstand for that particular system, and make sure that you're putting the appropriate level of protection, whether it's just backing up your data, whether it's a full DR environment, and making sure that you have the SLAs in place from your vendors to make sure that you're going to be able to meet all those requirements. is really important.
Thanks, Dave. Diego has a question. What happens if cloud access is not available at crisis moment? The advantage of physical backups has been material availability of data. How can we compensate for this?
Well, that definitely sounds like a Dave question. Dave, you want to address that one?
Kevin, can you repeat the question one more time?
Sure. What happens if cloud access is not available at the crisis moment? The advantage of physical backups has been material availability of data. How can we compensate for this?
Yeah, and this is the reason why having a hybrid cloud solution actually is a really good idea, so that you actually are able to do a recovery using your local backups, and that is going to be always your fastest way of actually doing recovery. And then you're using cloud to basically backstop that. What happens if I can't do a local backup? What if I only have a few days worth of retention and I didn't notice my ransomware basically hit me 7 days ago, and I've managed to back up my encrypted data. I want to be able to go farther back, so basically going into the cloud and going into farther data retention can be valuable. Again, this is the type of thing where thinking through all these different scenarios to make sure that you're able to recover is advantageous, because there are going to be situations where if you lose cloud connectivity or lose the network, that is one of the challenges of relying exclusively on cloud. It's one of the reasons why we don't recommend a cloud-only solution that does not have a physical appliance typically in there if you're using it for backup only. The other scenario is to try and actually have multiple connections, so you don't have a single point of failure if you can. We've even talked with people that are splitting and actually doing to multiple clouds. So it really depends to how protected you want to be, how many different scenarios, what are the different scenarios that you're worried about, and making sure that your overall solution is actually designed to protect all those different scenarios.
Okay, and Greg has a couple of questions. What is the typical bandwidth you need for daily incrementals? What have you seen in general, since bandwidth is always an issue?
I mean, obviously that'll be based on the number of servers, the amount of data you have to back up. I will mention, as we're talking about, the robustness of your connection to the cloud. At a previous job, I had a client who had a pretty extensive wide area network, and they did some comparison shopping and found that their local cable company had a business internet access scheme that was very inexpensive. And so they actually set up a separate circuit that simply handled their backups to the cloud. So there are creative ways that you can provide some redundancy into that connection to the cloud itself.
Yeah, and on the actual change rate question, Kevin, this is always a loaded question because there's so many things that go into it, including deduplication and compression and your bandwidth. But as a rule of thumb, if you just need something to kind of think through this a little bit, I tend to tell people you need about 2 megabits per terabyte of data if you have about a 2% daily change rate. Again, your mileage is going to vary. It might vary a lot from that number. So, please don't come back and sue me if your number is different than that. But that's just a good kind of rule of thumb planning guide. And we do get that type of question a lot.
Okay.
This is where we would bring in our sales engineers and actually help you try and figure out what exactly you need for your particular environment. But that's not a bad rule of thumb.
Okay, we're just about out of time here. I just wanted to follow up. Greg had a couple more questions, which is, how often can I back up the data? And then the other question was, do I need appliances at every site?
We can back up data almost near real time, so we can do backups as frequent as every 60 seconds. And do you need a backup at every site? Not necessarily. It is possible to actually have sites where you have remote connections with agents or systems that are basically tied into an appliance that's located elsewhere. If you have multiple sites, though, there are advantages that you can actually do as far as cross-replicating between the two sites. You can actually build in some DR kind of within your own environment. Again, if you have a complex environment with multiple sites, it's pretty typical to have multiple appliances at multiple sites, but not necessarily all your sites. It really is kind of a protection grid that you can build.
Okay, and one last question and we'll wrap it up from Sergey. Do you have any customers in the education sector? And does your solution provide flexibility in terms of retention policies?
Yes, we have a tremendous number. We're very strong in the education space, both in K through 12 as well as at the university level. Lots of case studies and success stories on our website, lots of other references that we can hook you up with for both large and small schools. And what was the second part of that question beyond the education?
Does your solution provide flexibility in terms of retention policies?
Yeah, we can get very granular with retention policy for how much data you actually store in the appliance. And one of the advantages of Forever Cloud is you actually can choose how much data you actually want to send to the cloud. You actually don't have to do an all or nothing solution. We do have another offer that will allow you to back up everything that's on your appliance into the cloud called the UnitTrans No Limits Cloud. But if you only want to back up, say, 10% of your data to the cloud that you consider critical or that needs that long-term retention, we're able to move that into the cloud as well. It does go into Forever Cloud. It does have a fixed retention policy today, where we basically do a number of daily backups that roll up into 4 weekly backups, that roll up into 12 monthly backups, that then roll into literally an infinite number of annual backups as long as you're on the plan. That's why we call it Forever Cloud in that offer.
All right. Well, we're just about out of time here. I just wanted to thank you guys for a great presentation and great Q&A. And as a reminder, this webinar was recorded. You'll receive an email after with a link to the on-demand version. Thanks again for joining us, and we look forward to having you on future webinars. Take care.